Welcome to Mishnah study Masechet Eruvin Perek Bet Mishnah here. Over here in this Mishnah, we're going to discuss a garden and a karpef, and we're really going to get into some geometry. Rambam really gets very jolly in this Mishnah, and we'll go through it Mishnah with his perush as well. So Ve'odam Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. Hagina ve'akarpef she'shivim v'shirayim al shivim v'shirayim. If you have a garden and a karpef, right, this outside storage area where they usually store their lumber and whatnot, that's 70 and change by 70 and change, right? 70 amot and change by 70 amot and change. Now, how do we get to this number? It's a rounded number, or it's trying to be as precise as we can, with a square root of 5,000 amot, right? We said the chatzir of the Mishkan was 5,000 amot, was 50 by 100. If you take the square root of that, it's 70 point, right? It's 70 about 5/7, right? But it's 70.7107, right? It's just a number, and that's why over here, Hanabam points out that we're using the language of shiraim, and and then it's an extra, right? 70 and change by 70 and change, because it's such a round number, and it's impossible to get to the exact decimal place. Therefore, that's what we're choosing. Okay, so it's about 70 and 5/7. If it's right now, usually a garden and a karpef is not a place that you live in. But now, mukefet gader gavua asarat vachim metatlim betocha. If it has a fence going around it, that's 10 tfachim high, of course, then you're allowed to carry inside, but on condition, it has to have one of these three. It has to either have a guardhouse or a place to live in, or it needs to be close to the city. Right? It's not enough to just have a gate going around this area, because it's not a place that people usually live in. So it needs to have one of these three conditions. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba. Okay, now comes to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu en ba ela bor v'shiach umara metaltlim b'tocha. If it has something else, one of these three. If it has a pit, right, a shiach, it's another type of pit, a cave, right, all these you're allowed to carry inside of it, right? So it doesn't have to have a guardhouse, but it needs to have a bor, a cistern, right? Rabbi Akiva Omer, afilu en ba achat mikol elu metaltlim b'tocha. Even if it doesn't have any of these, you could carry inside of it. You don't need anything. If you're talking about a garden and a karpef, right? As long as it's 70 and change by 70 and change, right? That's the maximum you could have. But I don't need to have a guardhouse. I don't need to have a cistern, right? Rabbi Akiva is the most lenient in this regard. Hanabam points out when we said 70 shivim v'shirayim over here, Rabbi Akiva, we know from elsewhere, holds, right, more similar to the Yerushalmi, 70 and 2/3 amah. Right, so he uses a more round number as opposed to the Yehuda ben Baba. When he said shivim v'shirayim, he was more precise, more accurate, which was the 70.71, that number, 70 and 5/7. But Rabbi Akiva is a little bit more lenient over here and more rounded, and he takes the 70 amot and 2/3. Okay, now Rabbi Eliezer Omer, so first I'm going to translate the exact chat to the language over here, and then we're going to see how the Tosefta, the Beraita, explains it. So firstly, if the length is bigger than the width, even by 1 amah, you can't carry inside of it, right? So it sounds like if it's going to be 69 by 71, you can't carry inside of it. Rabbi Yosef Omer, afilu orka kishnayim berochba metaltelim betocha. Rabbi Yosef says, even if the length is double of the width, you can still carry inside. Okay, now that we got through that part of the Mishnah, I just want to point out, when the Tosef, when Rabbi Eliezer says that, as long as the width, if the width is, the length is, even 1 amah bigger than the length, you can't carry inside of it. What does the Tosefta say? What does the Beraita say? It says that Rabbi Eliezer holds that right? If its length is more than double of its width, then you can't carry inside. Okay, now this sounds exactly like Rabbi Yosef's opinion. Right? If the length is double the width, then you can't carry. That's what Rabbi Yosef said. So how do we drive this? How do we make sense of both these opinions? So what's the difference? So the difference over here is the way Rambam explains it, is that according to Rabbi Yosef, right, you're allowed to carry inside as long as it's double, right? 50 by 100, that's okay, right? This is This is Rabbi Yosef's opinion. What comes out? What's the if you're going to take the diagonal, the hypotenuse, right? Because over here you could form a right triangle going across, right? What would that come out to? So if you take a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? Pythagorean theorem, then you'll get the 50 squared by 100 squared. What does that come out to? That comes out to 111.8. Okay, look at the. Sorry, I lied. Oops, I botched this. Okay, I fixed the slide midway. So if you have the 50 on one side, the 100 by the length, what does the diagonal hypotenuse come out to? 111.8. So the BOSS says, even though 111.8, right, the hypotenuse is more than double, as long as the length doesn't exceed double the width, that's okay. Comes to the Eliezer, and what does the Eliezer say? No, the diagonal can't be more than double of the width. Right? So if you have the width is 53.75 and the length is going to be 93 and 1/27th, then the diagonal comes out to 107.5, which is double the 53.75. So according to the Eliezer, that's the maximum that you could go. Right? So according to the Eliezer, it would be if the diagonal was more than 2 times of the rohav, of the width, even by 1 amad, then you're not allowed to carry inside of it. So that's the difference in opinion between Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Eliezer. And I just want to read Hanabam over here because here's where Hanabam is in his element. And everything that I mentioned over here with the roots of the numbers and calling out all the diagonals and the hypotenuse and the when it comes to all the perimeters, all this is easy for someone who has some understanding of geometry. But it will be very hard and impossible to understand for someone who doesn't have any understanding in geometry. So really have to thank our lower education, even in high school, they're giving us some of this basic knowledge we could appreciate and really come to some of these understandings in Masechet Eruvin. Halacha, who's the halacha like? Halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, where he said you don't need anything. Right? Rabbi Akiva said you don't need to have, the cistern, you don't have to have a watch house, nothing in there. But not what he said where it needs to be 70 and 2/3, rather it's more of the precise number, right? Of the 70 and 5/7. Ama. Halacha is like Rabbi Yosef. Right? Rabbi Yosef, where we said that it could be maximum 50 by 100, the Gina and the Karpef, the garden and the Karpef, they could be 50 by 100, even though the diagonal is going to be closer to 112, right? 111.8. That's fine as long as the length doesn't exceed more than 2 times the width. And then just to point out that it's important to know that any time that we make mechitzot and we have a kavanah to live there, right? Even if it was a ginana karpef, like we're talking about in our Mishna, if you intended to live there, then even if the area was 1,000 miles long, you could go ahead and carry inside all of it if you make the eruv. All we're talking about in Al Mishnah, if there was no intention to live there, it was shelohu kaf ledira. You didn't, when you put the fence around it, you didn't intend to live there, and that's what we're talking about over here, where the maximum size you could have is going to be the 15 by